Okay, good afternoon. I know we're slightly before 5 o'clock, so I will wait for those who are hoping to join. Thank you so much for joining this evening. And excellent, I can hear the things. I need to sort the sound out on mine. There we go. So we are live, and I know it's live on YouTube because I'm getting the feedback on the YouTube channel as well. So that is good, and we are good to go. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're delighted that Miles is joining us. I'm Ruth from Seneca. And I know all of you are using Seneca in your schools, and thank you so much. But I know you want to find out more about AI in general. And Miles has been kind enough to come and talk to us this evening. Miles is Professor of Computing Education at University of Roehampton. And I had the pleasure of meeting some of his students last week who are PGCE students for computer science. But Miles teaches the university's digital media degree as well, and is a member of the university's AI working group and chairs the National Centre for Computing Education's academic board. So we're delighted that Miles can join us this evening, and hopefully he'll provide us with some insights into how you can use AI in your classroom. So I am going to add Miles's lovely slides to the stage so you can see them. And can you access those okay, Miles?
It seems to be working fine. I've just said something. Hopefully people can hear me here. Nobody's sort of immediately posted into the chat to say it's silent. Shall I start, Ruth?
Yeah, you could. And just to say, if anyone's got any comments as you go through, I will be monitoring in the chat. Please do write us a message, and we can look in there. I can see my colleague Carl has posted in the chat. Hi, Miles and Ruth. So if the chat is working, so please do post any comments in there, and then we'll take questions as we get to the end. So thank you, Miles. Over to you.
Ruth, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be online for this. Ruth has already given a very good introduction, which summarizes much of what I do. But I thought I might try and get the machine to say a little bit about me instead. It's done a reasonably good job. It is not, as it is wont to do, hallucinated here. It's a reasonably accurate description of the sorts of things I do. It misses out the thing about I spent 18 years working as a school teacher before I moved into higher education. And it misses out some of the detail about what I've been doing with AI in education, but hopefully that will become apparent as we move on. We should start from what is the purpose of school? What is the purpose of the curriculum? Not just the national curriculum, but any school's curriculum. And according to the 2002 Education Act, and this kind of is reflected in the regulations for independent schools as well, curriculum has to do a couple of things. It has to, wait for it, promote the spiritual, moral, cultural, mental, physical development of pupils at the school and of society. There's a wider societal obligation on schools than just the individual pupils in their care, but also has to prepare pupils at the school for the opportunities, responsibilities, and experiences of later life. And it is worth pausing and thinking, okay, so what are those opportunities, responsibilities, and experiences going to be for the kid who started in year 7 this September? What is their later life going to be like? How can we best prepare them for all that the future has in store for them? And what's that future going to be like? It seems that the pace of technological change is such that AI in some form or another, probably even more impressive than you'll see with some of the technologies this afternoon, is going to be part of that. But there are other aspects, cultural change and environmental, global change. So there's so much in terms of preparing them for what comes next. But our curriculum has to do at least that. I was part of the team who put together England's computing curriculum, which was became official sort of almost 10 years ago now. I remember sort of the anniversaries of all of those meetings. And what we did with the computing curriculum, blame me or thank me, was identify the 3 elements of that: the foundations, the computer sciencey bits, the applications, the information technology, and the implications, which you might think of as digital literacy. But there is more to it than that. It's the implications for individuals and indeed for society. And I think that structure of foundations and applications and implications works really well when it comes to thinking about how we can prepare pupils for a future in which AI seems to play an increasingly important role. So, my 3 questions there: how does this even work? How can we use this productively and purposefully and well? And what does this mean for our pupils as individuals, but also for the society in which they will find themselves? And that's basically the structure for the next, 40 minutes or so. Let me talk about each of those in turn. And let's sort of set the ball rolling here by some consideration of the how does this work question, the foundations of particularly generative AI. This is just one aspect of artificial intelligence, of course. The Department for Education, bless it, says in their policy statement or guidance notes on this that we need to prepare our students for a world in which this sort of technology is part. So we have to, according to the DFE's guidance, teach students how to use emerging technology such as generative AI safely and appropriately. So part of their advice is that curriculum should now encompass all of these things. Some of you, I'm sure, are teaching GCSE computing or A-level computer science, and you have this model of what is a computer. It's a machine, it accepts input, it processes that according to a stored program, it produces output. I was visiting one of my students this morning who was teaching something very, very similar to that. And what he didn't say, and what we don't say when we're talking about secondary computer science education, is this is kind of wrong now. Yes, it accepts input. Yes, it produces output. But the link between input and output is now something which the machine establishes almost for itself there. So input and output are no longer so tightly coupled by the program that the coder has written, but are now coupled by the model that has been established on the basis of some machine learning algorithm. And yeah, the coder has some responsibility in selecting the best possible machine learning algorithm. What are the rules which determine that model? But also the training data, the examples with which it's provided. So we no longer code the thing by hand of saying, with this input, we produce this output, because that's way too, it would be far too difficult to do that for the sorts of examples, for the sorts of scenarios in which we're using technology now. We give it lots and lots of examples, and we say, establish the rules from the examples that you've seen. So getting the training data right, getting the machine learning algorithm right, is now just as important as getting the code right was once upon a time. The pupils that you're working with are almost certainly already familiar with the idea of a small language model. Some of you may be working in schools which have gone down the iPad, the tablet computer route. Even if you're not, many of your pupils will have smartphones which do this sort of predictive text thing. Watch a young person writing on a smartphone or a tablet or whatever. Typically, they're not writing all of it themselves. They might start off the sentence or the paragraph, but then much of the time they will choose between one of the 3 words that it suggests comes next. How does it know what words to show them? What are the 3 words that you get to pick from in that sort of small learning language model? Well, that's based on your use of the smartphone, or I should say their use of the smartphone. It's based on the model of how the English language works. It's not a particularly sophisticated language model, but very often it is good enough for the sorts of emails that we spend much of our time writing on smartphones. If you're working in Python, again, if you're teaching GCSE computer science or A-level computer science, you get pretty close to this idea of training a very small language model yourself. So we can take in to a Python program here a corpus of text. I'm going to use on the next slide the text of 3 Jane Austen novels and say, okay, build me a model here of how Jane Austen used the words of English there. Look at each triple of words. So for the first couple of words, which word comes next? So we have those trigrams from those 3 Jane Austen novels of this word, this word, this word comes up in the novel, and then another triple of words comes up in the model there. And once we have that, we can say, okay, given that the first 2 words in a sentence are I and am, or in a phrase are I and am, what word comes next in those 3 Jane Austen novels? And it turns out that 29% of the time, the word that she used next after I am was I am sure. And 7% of the time it was not, I am not. Then 6% of the time, I am very, I am afraid, I am quite. And you see the other words that she used in those 3 novels. So we have now some statistical model of her use of language. Just with the first 2 words, I am, what comes next? We could try it with any other 2 starting words to build up that model. Once you have that, you can take your own random walk through these words, through this pattern that's generated. So the code which you see on screen there says, okay, given the starting phrase, I am, pick the next word according to those probability rules. So we have the 3rd word. With the 2nd and the 3rd word, we can now use the same code to pick the 4th word. From the 3rd and the 4th word, we can pick the 5th word, and do that randomly using, the probability distribution from the text in Jane Austen. I'm glad I did say that she could do, Emma, suppose we all know the ways of being never able to collect her thoughts. It's not stunning writing. It's not even grammatically correct English, but it kind of mirrors the use that Jane Austen had of English back then. Of course, what we have now in our large language models in GPT-3.5 and GPT-4 is way more sophisticated than that. So this is GPT-3 from over a year ago, and it's about 18 months ago now, when you had this playground tool that you could have a look under the hood and see how it was choosing the words to come next. And originally it was there as a completer. So just as you saw with my small language model for Jane Austen, given these first 2 words, what word comes next? Given that sentence at the top of the screen, here are 5 ways in which AI can be used to provide access to the curriculum, what comes next? And, if I say, here are 5 ways, the next most likely thing is a bulleted numbered list, which starts with item 1. And then it has to choose randomly, and it chooses the word natural. Once it's picked natural, then language processing is reasonably likely to follow on from that. So in line 2 there, machine learning algorithms can be used to identify was 26% of the time what would come next, analyze 19% of the time, to create 7.5% of the time from the probabilities in its large language model, way more than just 3 Jane Austen novels there, of course. And this kind of explains how the hallucination thing happens, and how when you give it a prompt, one of your pupils gives it a prompt, it comes up with entirely different responses each time. That it's choosing each token, each word, randomly according to the distribution of what is most likely to come next from the words that it's been trained on. So if it picks something with a low probability and chooses an odd word, then the next set of tokens and everything after that has to sort of carry on from where the hole into which it has dug itself. So it will randomly assign words. And if it picks something odd, then it kind of doesn't know that it's done anything strange and will just carry on writing from that context. So it has no idea of what is truth, just what seems likely at each stage. And it does randomly generate stuff. Okay. There is a little bit more to it than that. And there is this sort of idea of the embeddings of the word, the context of the word. Anybody who's been teaching or working with children doing verbal reasoning tests, you have that whole, what is it? Hat is to head as glove is to, expect people to be typing hand into the chat there. That mapping from hat to head is exactly the same vector in this space of all words as the one which takes you from glove to hand. The really interesting thing is that vector, that mapping from one to other, is invariant across languages, that verbal reasoning is different in French and different in German, but the same idea of hat is to head as glove is to hand is preserved across the variation from one language to another. So as I say, that sense of the context of the word is part and parcel of the language model. And that's the really clever thing, that it gets to pay more attention to the really important bits of the prompt or the starting phrase because of how it understands that relationship between one word and another. With GPT-3, They were very open about how they trained it. So what is it? 60% of the training mix is there from the text on the open web, this Common Crawl database. WebText 2 is interesting. WebText 2 is the bit of the web that people have linked to from the Reddit site. I suspect there aren't many who are on this seminar now that are Reddit users. And even if you are a Reddit user, you've probably not posted many links into Reddit. But if you have, then those pages you've linked to make up 22% of the training mix for GPT-3, which is a really high percentage. And Wikipedia, which many of us will remember saying, you can't use Wikipedia in your work because it's made up by people, that's 3% of the training mix. It's gone round that loop 3.5 times. It's read Wikipedia 3.5 times for GPT-3. There was, again, a little bit more to it than that. So people who worked for OpenAI had policies to train this model with. So as well as here is how we use language, we started, or they started, to set up rules or guardrails or whatever of how to answer particular prompts. So we gave it examples of this is, or they gave it examples of this is a good response to this prompt. So step 1 there is showing it what a good response to a particular prompt looks like. Step 2 is the sort of comparative stuff of this is a better response than that. So showing it to go down that path much more often than it goes down the wrong path there. And then step 3, you sometimes see the thumbs up, thumbs down thing at the end of a GPT response. So you can vote on this is actually a helpful response or this is not a helpful response. It will pay attention to that and refine the policy that it applies to the language model for generating these responses. Okay, so you've got the training data and you've got then human reinforcement of the learning that's taken place. The new version does none of that. So GPT-4, they have been deliberately opaque about explaining how all of this magic works. This report contains no further details about the architecture, model size, hardware, training compute, dataset construction, training method, or similar. The firm is still called OpenAI, but they are no longer quite so open about the AI. I should, of course, and if you're teaching this in school or talking to your colleagues about it, we should say that there are limits to this. It doesn't understand. It's really articulate, it's really well read, and it's programmed to be helpful. The default persona in there is, what is it? Helpful assistant. But it doesn't understand. There is no reasoning or model of the world embedded in it, just the model of language. And this is interesting because what are you looking for amongst your pupils, amongst your students? That they understand these big ideas that I explained them to. And how can you tell if they understand? Well, in most of our subjects, most of the time, it's because they can tell us about it or write an essay about it or express themselves through the medium of language. And ChatGPT is very good at using language, and its brethren, the Gemini and Claude and all of the others, are very good at using language. So it fools our subconscious brain, I guess, into thinking it understands. There's nothing in the code which embodies genuine understanding, I would suggest. Philosophical questions here. I don't think it's thinking. I don't think there's any reasoning built into this yet. That may come with later versions. And so solving novel problems really is a problem for it. And thus, it's not particularly brilliant at maths. If it doesn't know what comes next in text, then it's got no way of just making an educated guess unless it's seen that sort of text before. And then the thing I'm worried about with things like the Snapchat version of this is children thinking that it's a person, children thinking of it as if it were their friend and it's there to help them. Of course, it isn't. There is no personality in that. Well, personality. It's not a person. It's not their friend. It's just, essentially it is just predictive text. It is just choosing the next word, the next token to show you. Okay, I think it's now time to move on to how we might use this as teachers. And again, advice from the Department for Education here. is anything you can do to make your workload that little bit smaller on the boring admin, filling in forms stuff, so that you can spend more time enthusing the kids about learning your subject, so that you can spend time working with young people themselves. That's got to be a good thing. So, DFE, teacher workload is an important issue. We're committed to helping teachers spend less time on non-pupil facing activities, as we see so much with all of the things which the DFE has done for us as a profession. And looking for ways in which we can use AI to help with that does seem to make sense. There are a whole number of platforms out there. This is, I think, TeachMate AI, which will act as the interface to, usually it's GPT 3.5, that you click on. So you select, I want, show me a lesson plan. So click on the button marked lesson planner, give it a few parameters, what age group, what's your particular planning structure. It will go off and write a lesson plan for you. I think you're perfectly capable of doing these things yourself using the ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever. But if you want ideas for how you can use it, and the stuff which you see from TeachMate, for example, really good way of doing that. I love this one, Magic School AI, particularly the one up at the top right here, this teacher joke generator, because who doesn't need a little help from the AI to write jokes that they can try out with their class in advance? I think none of us actually. Anyhow, DFE's consultation published I think it was in the October half term. It says November on the report there. Said when they talked to teachers about how they were already using it, we got those 7 things in the bullet points there. And I'll talk about some of those in what comes next. Also using generative AI to proofread, edit, and improve written content. I do this so much. So, somebody asks me to write a report about this, that, or the other. I'll write the thing. I will do that work myself. But then sending it to, typically in my case, it's ChatGPT and say, okay, what have I missed out? How could I improve this? And paying attention to the suggestions it makes. I don't think I'm making it do work which people have a reasonable expectation I should have done. But I might once upon a time have asked a colleague to have a look at the thing that I've written and see how they think I could have improved that. These days, I'm going to use the large language model to do that for me much of the time, I think. And then using it as a search tool is interesting. We'll talk a little more about that later. Okay, this is the point where if I can get it to work, it's nice if we can do your example. I've got a worked example here using stuff from computing education. But does anybody want to type into the chat now something a topic that they're teaching up in secondary school, could be GCSE class, something which it would be interesting to explore from a point of view of how can generative AI help us with teaching or our resources for a particular topic. It is that awkward wait time thing, isn't it? Oh, keep an eye. Oh, there we go. All right, investment appraisal business. Circulatory system. Circulatory system, I think, sounds like a good one to go with. GCSE biology, heart structure. Okay, appraisal. Thank you, Jagdish. That's very helpful. I'm going to go with something around climate change. Really interesting one, Robin. Okay, we're getting lots now. I'm going to go with the circulatory system, heart structure, as something around that. So when I tried it a little while ago, it wasn't working. So I've got Gemini up and running, but let's just see how we get on with a 0-shot prompt. So I can't type when people are looking. Teach a lesson on the circulatory system. Tell me 5 things I should cover. So a good textbook should do this. I could use Google search to do this for me. Let's see what it produces in response. Okay, complexity, a marvel of the human body. Oh my goodness, it's enthusiasm at this time of the evening. Structure and function, heart's anatomy and cardiac cycle. This is really helpful. So I'm getting a lot of good ideas. If I don't know about this, and you clearly do, this I'm sure would be, for somebody who knows the biology, this is you know this already. For somebody who doesn't, who finds themselves having to teach the supply lesson on this, this is actually quite helpful. So I'm going to stop it there and say, this is a good introduction for me. Can you put this in a memorable way for me to provide as text to a class of, I don't know when you teach this. I'm going to go with 15-year-olds. Memorable, engaging way. Dive into the incredible journey. Oh, my goodness. The enthusiasm is really quite painful here. Mighty Pump works 24/7. Grand Tour, first up, meet stars of the show. Okay. I think it is doing its level best to be helpful here and make this sort of thing memorable. Blood, the life juice. Dive into the river of life. Okay. I feel it's a little bit too enthusiastic in there, but we've got stuff going on in this at any rate. So I'm interested in how to make this perhaps a more accessible text for some of my pupils who may be learning English as an additional language. Give me a trivializing the whole subject matter here, 100-word summary of this written in a way that a 12-year-old could understand. So I'm reducing the target age range to make the language more accessible. Your body is a big city, powerful pump that sends blood on a journey through super fast highways. Okay, it may be making it that little bit too simple. How do you make this sticky? How do you make this memorable for your learners? What could be better than having this as poetry? So write me a rap about the circulatory system to help pupils remember the key points for an exam. It will take text in one format and very happily change that into another format. Drop some beats. This is going to be embarrassing. You listen up. We're on a circulatory quest with the heart in the chest, pumping at its best. 4 chambers beating, rhythmically meeting, lub-dub sounds with each greeting. Okay. I don't know whether that's going to work for your 15-year-olds. I feel we may be erring into teacher joke territory at this point, but we've got a chorus, we've got a bridge. I'm not going to read this out loud to you. Okay, I need to set a homework on this. Give me 5 multiple choice questions covering the key ideas of the circulatory system. The distractors should be based on common misconceptions. There we go. And I just want you to pause and think of how long it takes teachers to do this. And I have a lot of respect for the people who write textbooks and produce assessment items. This is in no way meant to dismiss their work and the importance of getting that sort of thing right. But this notion of we can produce this very, very quickly using the generative AI, when otherwise this might take us a long time. So it's put the correct answer in spot A, which is not particularly helpful for coming up with a useful multiple choice quiz, but it's done a reasonable job. Okay, jumble up the correct item in each list. Do not show which item is correct or which misconception is covered by each distractor. It's nice that it's explained this. And again, without that specialist biological knowledge, you'd struggle, or I would struggle to do this. These are great. Don't know if they are, by the way. Jumble up. Okay, let's see what it does now. Okay. Spelling and grammar affect quality of outcomes. David, have I made loads of spelling mistakes? It's normally pretty good at spotting where what I meant, even if it's not quite what I said. Okay, I'm not actually checking whether this is the same ones that we came up with originally. Okay. I kind of wanted to let it run through because the next bit I wanted to show you too. Okay. All right. Okay, now give me these as a PDF. And at this point, the next item, the next token that it needs to produce is a bit of code. So the little analyzing thing there is in GPT-4, where what it's doing is writing a small Python program to take these question assessment items and produce hopefully a PDF based on it. We can see what code it's writing, but we may not want it to get quite to the end of that. My point of making it as a PDF is if I'm using something like Microsoft Office Forms as an assessment tool, and I know, we have a particularly good assessment tool available from our friends at Seneca, then Office Forms will accept a PDF and create the quiz based on that. And of course, there are AI tools now built into Seneca. So it's given me the PDF there. Can I see this? Downloading the file. And here we've got the 5 questions as a PDF, which I could take into Microsoft Forms. I don't know whether this is a really good one to use, but okay, give me an image of the heart or circulatory system of the circulatory system chosen to communicate these key ideas in a visual way. And again, GPT-4 has access to DALL-E 3, and on a good day will produce an image based on this. I am waiting patiently for it to do that. There is, as I say, the pre-prepared example. So it's not instant, but it is way, way quicker than going off and finding something. And the notion that, once upon a time, those making tech, that is pretty impressive. I do not know whether it is actually an accurate diagram. And the thing is, it kind of gobbles up the language in there, despite it being really good at language. None of these words are actually English. They just look like, from a distance, they look as if they could be English words in there. There is a nice, interesting exercise for your learners to correct the labels on the diagram that GPT has produced. And I kind of feel correct the mistakes on the diagram that it has produced. No, I don't know enough biology to be able to speak about whether this is helpful or not, but hopefully people on the call do. Right. Okay, where do we go to from here? Let me step out of the deck because we've covered lots of this. Oh, this is quite fun. So do you remember that whole TED, flipped classroom thing that we used to do? Sorry, I've just made that full screen and I didn't mean to do that. Presenter view. Okay, hopefully this is still visible to you in the window. Okay, nobody's speaking to me. Right, all right. Where did I go? So if you take a TED or flipped classroom idea, I want you before the lesson to watch the whole of this video and then answer some questions on it. How do you know that they actually watched the video? Well, you can get the transcript of the TED talk or whatever YouTube video you're giving them. Send that into ChatGPT and it can produce, just as we've seen already, multiple choice items based on that content here. I ask it to give me a summary of the TED talk and then I move on to the next. Oh, no, we don't want to see it. It's fine. Really it is. Show me the next slide. Okay. And, again, taking that as its starting point, it's come up with assessment items, which, as you've seen, I can bring into Microsoft Forms or other assessment platforms. Here is an example from, I think that would be DALL-E, of producing pictures for digital piracy. This is from Midjourney. And if you're into this, then paying your $100 or whatever for the Midjourney subscription and seeing just how stunning the cutting edge quality is in a very sophisticated AI image generator. This was without any irony about digital piracy. There are other things that teachers have to write text for than just lesson resources, such as school reports. So as parents, the top 3 lines there are enough for us about how our daughter's been doing in her computing lessons. But there's the big box on the school report form. So teachers feel obliged to fill in all of the content in the big box. I give it the text at the top and say, write me, I don't know, 100-word report for her parents, set some targets, and it will gladly do that. There are ethical issues for you as a school to consider about whether that's the right thing to do in this sort of context. Many of you, I'm sure, will be interested in analysing assessment data, doing this at national scale. So how well did each school do in terms of progress from Key Stage 2 SATs to GCSE outcomes in last summer's exams? Give me a scatter plot of all of that. And you see that picture there where, if you know how well the kids did at Key Stage 2, you've got a pretty good idea of what grades they will get at GCSE at the end of that. You would do that at individual level. I'm just doing that at national level. Oh, and then there's a whole issue around allowing the AI to see individual pupil level data. Be very careful about that if it has identifiable items. We've talked a little about this already, so I don't really want to dwell on this. The point really is that we can only learn how to write good prompts if we can write clearly and understand the domain we're asking about, and sense check the results if we have a schema against which to compare them. I don't have enough GCSE biology knowledge to know whether those questions are good, to know whether that explanation is good. And thus, it's no substitute for actually knowing the thing you're about to go into the room and teach. I'm conscious of time passing. You can go and buy the books, you can go on the courses, you can learn how to prompt well. But my guess is that pretty much everybody on the call now is good at prompting, because that's what we do as teachers. Hopefully you spotted that in that dialogue in which I was engaged with ChatGPT about the circulatory system, I was talking to it in a very similar way to how I might talk to a student, or in my case, a student teacher, perhaps, of responding to its response to me, of asking for clarification, asking it to put it in a different form. So that dialogue here, really helpful. And, the be clear and precise, I didn't say, don't tell me which the correct answer is in the multiple choice items until I sort of spotted the mistake there. The persona thing is interesting. You can get it to take on a different role than helpful assistant. And that's quite fun to play with that. And there's a whole thing going on at the cutting edge around fine tuning. So I've told you about how the large language models are trained, or how we think GPT-4 is trained. You can get in there and give it example text and say, change the weights in the language model according to these examples. So if there's a particular style of text in the textbooks you're using, or the exam quest papers that you're taking, you can give it examples of that, copyright notwithstanding, and ask it to produce text which follows that pattern and the rules of that language. Right. Very quickly then, how would your pupils use this? And I'd love to hear the stories about how your pupils are already using this in time that we have left. So my daughter does this, Simon Singh Parallels thing, sort of extension maths type thing. And, he asks good questions like, my age, when the digits my age are reversed, the new number added to my age, the result is a perfect square. It's a non-trivial problem. So, of course, her father encourages her to just paste that into ChatGPT, and it does an incredibly bad job, because all it is doing is writing words. It's not thinking. One number that satisfies these conditions is 63. 63 is odd and not a prime. When you reverse the digits and add them to 63, you get 72, which is a perfect square. No, it isn't. You can also reverse the digits of 63 and subtract them from 63 to get 48. No, you don't, which is also a perfect square. No, it isn't. It gets this so badly wrong. It has got better at maths of late. And if you give it the same question now, it does get it right. And of course, we all know it will get better at this. They set her for the October half term to revise for her history exam. So of course you could get GPT to tell her all about the Battle of Crécy, which is exactly what a 13-year-old needs to know here in the third millennium. But much more interesting is to get it to come up with a good question for her to answer, for her to think about. And it does this in a really helpful teacherly way of, here is your question. And then when answering the question, be sure to remember it's been trained on how we've used language. And of course, her parenting failure here. She doesn't actually do this. We paste this into Bard Gemini as is now, and it writes the answer to this as if it were 12 years old. So, and it's a good answer to this. It pays a lot of attention to as if you were 12, because it writes part of this in the voice of a 12-year-old at the Battle of Crécy, which I thought was a really clever, inventive way. Maybe it just misunderstood. Okay, and then, we give ChatGPT the response generated by Bard, just as we could give it the response that she herself would have written. It's generally very positive in its feedback. Remember, helpful assistant is its default persona. Critical teacher, take the part of a critical teacher reading this essay, critical examiner reading this essay, would be well worth playing with. Does an excellent job. With a few tweaks and addition would be even stronger. Keep up the good work. It gives far more detailed response to an essay than most of us as teachers would have time to do. Of course, your pupils don't want to read the feedback. They just want to know what mark did they get. So, okay, give me a mark for this essay. And it comes up with its own scoring rubric, which is really pretty good and gives her a grade of 18 out of 20. And of course, because we can create an image to encapsulate the Battle of Crécy in the style of a medieval illuminated manuscript, it's fabulous. And the thing which, the contemporary chroniclers do not record is that our victory, or Britain's victory, England's victory at the Battle of Crécy, was down to our air superiority by employing a squadron of dragons to fight on our side. And of course, you can do this with exam answers. And it's tempting to get it to do the marking for you. And I think we will see more of that, but much, much more interesting and no fewer legal, ethical issues is getting your pupils to send their work to the AI and saying, give me some feedback on my work. More from the N=1 ethnographic study of my daughter. She does this house debating competition. So she had to oppose the idea, what was it? The opposition speech to the spirit beyond the letter. So it was about the place of rules within school, really. So picture this. It's a sunny, she gave it her ideas and said, write this into a good speech that I could use in the debating competition. Picture this, it's a sunny day and you feel the light breeze gently tousling your hair, comfortable, free and in the moment. Then someone reminds you, hey, tuck in your shirt. I don't know, the tousled hair, the untucked shirt. I wonder exactly whose political rhetoric it has been trained on at this point. Okay, this was over the weekend. Was this written by a human or was this written by a machine? And you know the context of the talk. You can guess. So she's asked for homework to write an obituary of this Hannibal Barber. I don't know whether that was a name she chose or whether that was the set text there. So the text, the task is to write an obituary. And of course, you can get ChatGPT to write an obituary of Hannibal Barber. She's dyslexic. And so she prompts it to write the obituary in the style of a dyslexic 13-year-old. And I don't know, this is witty and amusing and it feels original here. Okay, response essay, get feedback. David, I will come back to this in a moment. Okay, it's a good question. She's loving this night cafe thing. I don't know, this is Titania and Oberon and clearly Snow White. Is this creative? No, because it's the machine that's creative. But her dialogue around the image generation is really very, very interesting of how she's refining her prompts to produce the artwork that she wants to see. Okay, I'm now largely out of time to allow time for questions. It's just worth talking a little about how it's so good at allowing access and inclusion in a curriculum for those who would otherwise be really excluded from this. This is Microsoft's Seeing AI app, which will read the text in front of the phone camera. And those scanning pen things, this does all of that as a phone app for free without having to buy additional hardware. Although, of course, the DFE are banning phones in school. Immersive Reader, fabulous. So what do I do here? I swap into View and go to Immersive Reader. And I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try playing this. I just think how much more accessible. That makes text for children who would otherwise really struggle with that, converting the graphemes into the phonemes. And of course, the other direction is phenomenally good as well. Oh, I can do this in my talk, can't I? So I can turn on caption preferences, toggle captions. I've not trained this to recognize my voice. This isn't like Dragon Dictate where you had to go through all of those words. This is just using the normal correspondence between the phonemes I'm speaking and the graphemes that you're seeing on screen. So for somebody who is hearing impaired, being able to have that transcript is phenomenally good. Microsoft PowerPoint does this even better and will do translation into the surtitles, into the captions at the same time. And I'm really interested in whether this is helpful for dyslexic children to be able to see the representation of the word there just as they're hearing it said aloud. I'd like to see the data on that. I'd like to see the evidence. I find it distracting, so I'm going to turn it off. What do we need to talk about now? Oh, and the app for ChatGPT is really very, very good. Language is interesting here. So on the left, you see this is benefits of using large language models in higher education, working in a second language, and it gives a really good response. On the right-hand side, you're seeing text in Georgian. The interesting thing here is that the Georgian text, the ideas are less sophisticated than they are in the English text. So the Georgian text, for comparison, has, I don't know, language models, enhancing the language experience. Models can be directed to language directions, to correct directions, and to align in new structures. It's not unhelpful, but it's not the same as we've seen in the English language version of a response to the same thing. Generally, if you just carry on the chat and say answer in Georgian or give it the Georgian question, it will just do a translation. But if you start a new chat and prompt in Georgian or French or whatever, the next tokens that follow a string of Georgian words are more Georgian words, because the corpus of text in Georgian is much more limited than it is in English on the open web. It seems that the quality of thinking there is at a reduced level. And the whole, Wittgenstein thing about the limits of my language are the limits of my world, that the language in which we talk with it does seem to make a difference. Right. I want to talk a little about the integrity bit, and then I will stop and take questions. Where would you draw the line on this list? Is it cheating if ChatGPT explains something to you, gives you ideas for your essay, suggests how to improve your essay, and writes your essay for you? Generally, when I've done this with a live audience with a show of hands, most people draw the line between the third and the fourth item here. The first three seem fine in most circumstances, maybe not for assessed coursework. But the fourth one definitely doesn't. And I think there's a good reason why. One of your pupils comes up to you after the lesson and says, "Miss Sir, could you explain this to me?" Most of us will say, "Yeah, of course, here you go," because it's our job to explain things to people. That's what we do. If a pupil comes up and says, "Can you give me some ideas for how to get started?" we will do that for them. Most of us do that with the assessment materials we produce. If they come up to us with a draft and say, "Miss Sir, could you show me how I could make this better?" It's hard to make the time for this, but generally we will do that. If they're interested in how to make this a better essay, we'll generally take the time to help them with this. If they come up to us and say, "Could you write the essay for me?" I think they know what the answer will be. Similarly, their parents will do the top three, but not the fourth. Their friends will generally be happy to do the top three, but should not be doing the fourth. I think we have a reasonably well worked out feel for the first three is okay because they help learning. The fourth does rather seem to be cheating. Of course, JCQ have the official rules for this. When it comes to coursework, you can't, as a school, you cannot accept work for assessment unless you know that it's consider it to be the student's own. And of course, that you, as a student, cannot get credit for the work that the machine does. So when we have this issue with personal statements, my teacher training course at Roehampton, if you convince me you've got experience working with young people and have got a background in computer science, I will at the very least interview you for my PGCE course. If, on the other hand, you paste into ChatGPT, I've got a degree in computer science and I've helped out with a local coder dojo. Write this as a personal statement. I don't know what to do now. You meet my selection criteria, but I now worry about your personal integrity. If you've decided it's okay to make a machine write a personal statement about you, I really don't know where I go with this. Do I rule them out because they cheated? Or do I say, look, you've got a background in computer science and you've worked with young people, of course I will interview you. It's a tricky one. And, you paste this text. I know this text is machine generated because I generated it into the AI detectors. And usually they do a reasonable job, but do not rely on them, certainly not for anything high stakes. And the advice from UCAS, those of you who are working with sixth formers, writing university applications, is it's okay to do the 3 things on the left, but it ain't okay to do copy and paste. And UCAS claim that they've got systems in place to detect that. Okay, I will stop talking, although there are a few more things which we could talk about, and see if there are any questions that you want to ask me whilst we're all together. So, David, if you wanted to enter a whole class worth of response essays, get feedback marks, what would be the best way to tackle this? You could write a tool to do this. There will be tools out there if they're not already there. Somebody will have systems which do that sort of auto marking thing or get AI generated marking. My experience has been you need to give it a detailed rubric. So you need to tell it what the marking criteria are. Although, as you saw in my n=1 example, it did a pretty good job of coming up with its own. And you need to tell it to be critical. Remember, its default personality is helpful assistant, and it will err on the side of generosity. If you want it to give constructively critical feedback, you have to specifically prompt for that, and it will do its level best to grade slightly more harshly than it would otherwise have done. You could write code to do this. So the API is there for GPT-4. So, you could submit you give it a whole bank of essays, work through the file. It submits this over to the API for GPT-4 and produces the feedback as response. As I say, there will be commercial tools around, if not already then before very much longer. At the moment, I would probably do it one assignment at a time, but there are issues. So they own the intellectual property in the work which they do in school. They have copyright in their work. And there is also a thing in GDPR about you cannot use fully automated processing for things that have significant effects. Now, a homework is not something with a significant effect, but if we're talking about grading exam work or university essays, then there has to be a person at least overseeing the process in there. Getting your pupils to submit their essay and getting feedback themselves from the machine, absolutely fine. You doing it for them, terms and conditions start to apply. In fact, terms and conditions apply for them too. And under 13s using this is tricky here. Robin asks, is there an AI which will read handwritten student work? Yes. So I did this. Here you go. So this, I took the photo on my smartphone, beamed it to, how did I do this? Yeah, there's an example of my doing this. I think I just uploaded the photo taken from on the smartphone to GPT-4 and said, give me some suggestions for how to improve my essay. And it did a pretty good job of that. Okay, let me scroll back through other questions. You can always try our new magic quizzes. And Seneca, yes, thank you. Okay, does it make a difference, though you may not notice?
I haven't got any other questions just at the moment. I'll put them up as a banner. But if anyone else has any questions, please do post them in the chat for you. The only one I would say that reads handwritten questions, Photomath, I know does a very good, reasonable job at solving the maths questions.
Yes.
As I discovered as my daughter randomly took them of her maths homework.
That's right. Okay, well, I'll keep an eye on the chat, but let me just finish the last few slides in case nobody else has anything to say, because I've got plenty of things I could say. So I talked to you about the terms and conditions, and the products we've been talking about today there is this rule of you cannot use these unless you're over the age of 13. There are a few out there where you don't need to sign in order to use it. I think Perplexity is very good for this, but if you read the terms and conditions for Perplexity, which like just fires things out over to GPT 3.5, again, you have to be over the age of 13 to use this. So it's fine to show them you're using it in class. It's fine for their parents to work with their children using these tools, as I did with my daughter who was then 12. But getting them, before they get to the age of 13, to use the tools themselves, you're on dodgy territory there. A whole host of principles that we ought to try and follow. I think as schools, we ought to be really transparent about this. So if you're going to fire their work at GPT-3 and get feedback on it, tell them that that's how you're doing this. Passing off its work as if it's your own feedback to pupils, I think, is kind of dodgy and not an example we would want to set to our pupils. And getting the AI to write reports, which then go to parents. Many of them, some of them will be able to tell that you've sent it off to the AI to produce this. And Robin asks, can an AI make a PowerPoint for me when given content? Yes, to a point. It will write you text which goes onto the slide very, very easily. It can generate images which match that content very easily. Doing the whole thing in one shot, I think you're looking at something with a subscription model. You can do it yourself using the AI tools to do the bits of this. So give me a structure for a presentation on the circulatory system. What should I put on the slide about how the heart works, or the 4 chambers of the heart, or whatever it is? Give me an image which illustrates this. You can do that interactively through a conversation. But the whole thing about, I got to teach a lesson on the circulatory system in 5 minutes, make me a presentation. You're looking at the moment, stuff where there is a subscription involved. Copilot is coming to Office 365, or is already there for for Microsoft's business customers. And I think that's, do you remember the little paperclip thing? It looks as though you're writing a letter. Would you like some help with that? It looks as though you're writing a presentation on the circulatory system. Would you like me to do that for you? It is only a matter of time if it's not already there. The integration into common productivity tools, I think, is very, very soon. Any other platform that you recommend apart from ChatGPT for use in school? Jagdish, this is a really good question. I'm so glad you asked that, and I've got time to answer it before we stop. Use whatever platform your school's already using. So if you're a Google school, go with Gemini, because there will soon be a very good integration into your Google Apps for Education, into Google Docs and all of that. I think, I have no inside information here. If you're a Microsoft school, then using Copilot as your AI platform of choice makes a huge amount of sense. I think Microsoft are a long way down the line towards integrating Copilot into the Office tools. Those of you who are doing computer science education, VS Code as a text editor, the AI Copilot extension to that is phenomenally good. And the way it starts typing things for you is really very, very scary, I find. And yeah, be careful with the privacy. This is not GDPR compliant. So beaming pupil level data to it would be very, very scary. And we're starting to be aware of the environmental impact of all of these compute cycles. Policy and professionalism. MS365, not found it to be of much use. Very dumb compared to ChatGPT. Very much like Clippy. Oh dear, that does not sound very, very encouraging. But assertivity, if you think it's going to get worse over the next 5-6 months, then I'd love to know your reason why. I suspect this is a monotonically improving trend here. Right. What else? Oh yeah, the bias thing. This one's fun. Oh, no, gone into the wrong thing. Slideshow, presenter view. So the images on the left is what you get if you ask, I think this was Dawley, to produce pictures of computer scientists. The images on the right are Dawley's attempt at producing pictures of programmers. All 8 of these people have something in common other than they're all wearing spectacles. And this may not be the sort of images you're wanting to show your pupils about computer scientists and programmers or other categories there. This is interesting. This idea of the things that stick with us are the things that we've had to work really, really hard at. And the danger is that rather than engaging with this form of an obituary, my daughter just gets ChatGPT to produce one and pretend that it is dyslexic and doesn't then remember anything about how to write an obituary. So teachers should do their level best to explain things as clearly as possible to their pupils. But pupils have to work hard in order to remember these things. And there is a danger that we make it just that little bit too easy. And, we get to the point now where in order to use ChatGPT, I'm the one who has to prove that they're human, rather, because it is so convincing at pretending to be human itself. How do I do that? Well, ticking the box is one way to prove I'm a human being. But the things on this slide, I think, are going to remain really, really increasingly important in education. So, being able to use these tools is pretty cool. But, teaching things like perseverance and self-control and, how to get on with other people is going to be very, very important in an AI-driven age. If you want to see the slides again, then the URL is on screen. I will do my level best to post that into the chat for you. Can I get that? Yes.
If you send those to me as well, Miles, I can wing those round to everybody who joined today as well.
Okay, that's fine. It says I've not been able to post it into the chat anyhow. That's the URL. Hey, listen, thank you so much for being with me this last hour. It's felt as though you're not really with me, but hopefully some of this has been of interest to you. And thank you for those who engaged with the chat there.
Thank you so much indeed. It has been absolutely fascinating, and it's you clearly have a wealth of knowledge on a vast number of different platforms, and it's interesting to have seen you actually trying this out with your daughter's attempts as well, because I think that gives us a real sense of how it can be used by students. I have many thank yous in the chat, and so it's obviously been well received. I will, for everyone who has joined, if you want to drop me an email, want anything more, I will try and send out a copy of these slides to those who have attended. I put my email in the chat for anybody who wants it, and Miles's is on the screen for you. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, folks. And thank you, Ruth.